Okay, hello everyone. I'm Miranda and I'm back for another devotional. I'm excited to be here. And what I'm doing is, of course, at the very last minute, but this is a devotional among friends, and we're just here as people who love the word and want to share it. So let's see. I got a new clicky thing. Um, my attempt is going to be to use it to forward the slides instead of having to use the phone because I was finding myself having to look down at the phone to make sure I click the right button. So I'm going to try this and see can I get it to work. And well, let's see. I don't know if it's on or not. Let's see if I do clicky. Nope, nothing. So, okay, I'm going to have to figure out how this works. But anyway, that's not working. So, we're going to have to go back to the phone. So, this is our soundtrack for this week. No, that is not even the right one. So, share. Well, that's not the right one. It is. Okay. So let's try this one. Nope. Wow. You know what? I didn't change any of these things. Okay. So it looks like I'm going to have to try and change it on the fly. Okay, we're going to change it on the fly. That's interesting. It was in there, but it wasn't changed. Okay. So that's week 41 that we're on. And as you can see, we finished Malachi and we actually started in the New Testament. So, what we're going to focus on this week is Malachi because I've never studied in depth, or it's been a long time. I forgot kind of what Malachi was about. So, we're going to use him as our focus for this week 41. And now let's make sure that we can share the screen with you here. And there are the voices that are in your head that are saying, "Oh my gosh, you're not doing so good because you're not prepared and you're not ready." And you know, I do take this very seriously because it is a commitment. It is a commitment that I made to do these every week. But it's a lot. It's a lot to do and prepare for. And I refuse to let my thoughts or our enemy get me in a state where this is not enjoyable because I'm stressing about this point or that point or how I might seem or how people perceive what I'm doing. Because this is supposed to be fun. It's a hobby. It's supposed to be a delight. It is something, a commitment that I made. So if I'm stumbling around, nobody's paying me for this. What I am doing is just sharing in a very public and transparent manner. And I have to remind myself of that because Another thing that this does for me is it keeps me trying new technology things, and it keeps me doing that in a way that doesn't hurt any of my customers. This way, it's just me like testing and in the battleground. So with all that said, I apologize if it annoys you that I don't have everything 100%, but we do all know that before you get to 100%, you had to have gotten to 10% and 50 and 4 and 2. So this is the testing ground. This is the part that nobody wants anybody else to see, because we want to step out in the world and look like, we always had it like that. But there is always a process to things. God Himself could have taken one day to create the whole world. I mean, that's who He is. But I believe He showed us that there is a process to things. There are things you have to do first, then second, then third, and then there is a season for things. And so this is just the season of me doing Bible study and just being totally transparent about figuring out how to do a live stream by myself and pushing all the buttons at the right time so that we can see what we're supposed to see. So now, hopefully, you can see this screen that says Renewal and Malachi, the prophet. My little other screen over here says that you can see it. So we are going to go with this. All right, here we go. Week 41. Like I said, we finished Malachi and actually started in the New Testament. So Malachi wrote to Jews in the Persian province of Judea. That means that the Jewish exiles that were returning from Babylon had recently settled in Judea. So these are the people that were brave enough to take the chance and say, hey, I'm going back home. We're going to restart and rebuild again. Everybody didn't go. But these people that Malachi is writing to were the ones that had actually returned. The temple had been rebuilt at this time, but of course it paled in comparison to Solomon's temple. And a lot of the Jewish people that were there during Solomon's temple days, they actually were weeping because they remember how glorious Solomon's temple was, and now they were here with this temple. So Malachi was writing to the priests and Levites. They had led the people to sin instead of away from sin. They'd gotten caught up all in themselves. They were offering inferior animals for sacrifices and neglecting tithes and offerings. Now, many of us, when we think of Malachi, we always think of that verse that talks about robbing God by not giving your tithes and offerings. Well, in this particular culture, having crops and animals, that was your livelihood. And the priests and Levites had dedicated themselves to temple service, so they weren't given an allotment of land to take care of themselves. So the only way they were prosperous or took care of themselves was from the tithes and offerings from the people. So and that became part of the Israel's religious duty, was to give those sacrifices, and therefore there were portions of the sacrifices that was given to the priests, and that's how they made their living. So we hear this message about giving tithe so there'd be meat in my house. We hear that preached a lot today, but in that day, it really did mean so that the priest could eat. Okay, so we're in a different time, and it doesn't apply exactly the same way. Okay, so that's my spiel about that. And so we'll go into the next one. Okay, so this is a little timeline, kind of putting it in order in our minds, because we are doing a chronological Bible. And let's go back to the screen so you can see it here. Uh, okay, Darius, king of Persia. So you remember the Persians overtook the Babylonians. So I just picked some of the dates to keep them in order. But we had Haggai the prophet, Zechariah the prophet. We talked about Zechariah last week. The temple is rebuilt. Then, somewhere along the 400s, Malachi came along with his message. And then we had Ezra, who traveled to Jerusalem. Then we had Nehemiah, who traveled to Jerusalem and became the governor. So Malachi doesn't give like a particular date like some of the other prophets did, that said during this time of the reign of this particular king is when I was writing my stuff. He just starts giving his messages and just comes on the scene and goes off the scene and becomes the last book of the Old Testament. So the estimate is that he was somewhere in the 400s, between after the temple was built. So clearly the temple was rebuilt because he was talking about giving sacrifices and talking about the people giving inferior sacrifices, animals who were um, food that was defiled, or animals that were defective or had some kind of blemish. So we know it was after the temple was rebuilt, okay, that Malachi was given this message. So the hopes that was raised by prophets before Malachi, Haggai, and Zechariah to the returning exile people, their hope of a revival of David's dynasty through Zerubbabel, and their raised hopes of prosperity by coming back and rebuilding Israel, and the new covenant that was promised through Jeremiah. And you can see that in chapters 31, verse 23, and chapters 31 through 34 in general. So the promise of David's line, a king through Zerubbabel, is where we left off right here in the timeline. They were expecting another king to come and make them great upon, among the nations. And that's where this genealogy would picked up. That's why they were expecting a king through this particular person right here. I mean, they did get it, but of course, not in their lifetimes. So, has God failed us? They have been unfaithful in the decades following the return from exile. They even started accusing. Oh, I need to show you this slide. So, what I was showing you is that this is why they were expecting a king from David's dynasty through Zerubbabel right here, because this was the next one that was in the royal family. Okay. So has God failed us? This is what they were thinking. It had been hundreds of years already, at least hundreds of years. So they had become unfaithful. They accused God of favoring evildoers. Their righteous acts have not produced material blessings. And you remember Deuteronomy 28 that says, "And all these blessings shall come upon thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God." So they remembered all of these things. The message of Malachi The first oracle was against Edom. The second one was against the temple priesthood. The third, Yahweh hates faithlessness. And even here, they were invited to think back to how the Lord has been faithful, to how he has delivered you, to how the Lord has been a a God of his word. He have stood by his word in on so many occasions. They were invited to remember that. And even in their worship practices, they were given directions about teaching these things to their children in some of the worship ceremonies and feasts and things that they were to keep. All of that was to keep that in the forefronts of their minds, because when you get caught up in what's going on in the world, what's going on in your life, trying to get the crops to grow, trying to keep the money going, trying to satisfy your husband, trying to deal with the children, raising them, all of that stuff is going on. You need a way to stay centered on the things that are truth and the things that are important, okay? Not just the things that are urgent, the things that are important. Because if you don't create that time of remembrance, and that's exactly what we're doing here today, it will overtake you. Life itself, just the issues of life will come and just take your mind away from those things. And God knows that. And that's why he created the festivals and the lifestyle for them to actually keep these things in the forefront. But these people had thought, like, you know what? It's been too long and you haven't done any of this stuff yet. And we expected it by now. But when we look at some of the promises and prophecies, we have the benefit now of looking back and saying, whoa, how long did it take that prophecy to come to pass? And so we have no reason to think that just because we read it in the Bible today is going to happen tomorrow. So we really have to get with the idea that, if we're going to believe God, we're going to have to be patient and just believe God. And whether that happens now in our lifetimes or not in our lifetimes, we know that it will, because that is what we believe. And if we don't believe that, then we just need to go do something else. But if we believe that, we don't need to allow ourselves to go into the space of, where is God? What is he doing? Why is he not letting things happen the way that he said that they would? Because that brings in doubt, and that creates this life of just being unsatisfied, and that just can't lead to anything good. So it's not easy, and God knows it's not easy. That's why he tests us and he tries us and he gives us the benefit of the doubt. He's patient with us because we can't possibly understand his plan and his timing. So he is very patient with us. Okay. And then there was number 4, that Malachi's message was, Yahweh's messenger is coming. Number 5, overflowing of blessing. This was talking about testing God to see if, after they were faithful with their tithes and offerings, would he overflow their blessings. And then the message of Malachi number 6 is the book of remembrance. Okay. Now, one of the questions I had and I let Chat GPT help me, was over here. where it says the oracles against Edom. Well, when you look on a map, sometimes you'll see Edom and sometimes you'll see Idumeum. Um, Idumea, spelled Idumea. Okay. And so my question was, please attempt to help me understand why Edom is called Idumea. Now, we know Edom is called Edom because that was the people of Esau's dynasty. And the Lord plainly says, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated, because Esau was very self centered and he despised his blessing. And so we already know that Edom is a people that was not blessed by the Lord. So my question was, why is Edom called Idumea? And this is what it says. I thought this was fascinating. The terms Edom and Idumea refer to the same people group, but in different historical and linguistic contexts. Edom's original biblical name means red. The descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother, who was born red and hairy, is a territory located southeast of Israel, roughly in the modern day southern Jordan and parts of southern Israel. It is frequently mentioned in the Old Testament as enemies of Israel, especially during the Exodus, monarchy, and prophetic periods. Idumea is a latter Greek and Roman name. It simply means it is the simple Latin and Greek or Greek version of Edom. The name change came about during the Hellenistic period after Alexander the Great, 4th century BC, and it continued under Roman rule into New Testament times. Why the name shift? As the region under Greek influence, as the region came under Greek influence, many Hebrew names were transliterated into Greek, like Yeshua becoming Jesus. Edom became Idumea in official documents and maps during this period. Territorial shift and political context. By the time the Maccabees, which was 2nd BC, 2nd century BC, the Idumeans were forcibly converted to Judaism by John Hyrcanus, which was a Hasmonean leader. One of their descendants, Herod the Great, the Roman appointed king, was when Jesus was born. He was the Roman appointed king when Jesus was born, and he was a Idumean by ancestry. So an Idumean being a Edomite. So when you see Idumea in later texts, especially the New Testament or Roman era maps, it's referring to the same people as Edom, but often now living further north due to geopolitical shifts. I don't know why all the words got jumbled like that. Examples and Bible verses. Edom, Obadiah 1, 1 through 4. Prophecy of judgment against Edom. Idumea, Isaiah 3, 34, 5 and 6. A prophecy that uses the term Idumea is rare in the Old Testament, but appears in the King James Version. People from Idumea followed Jesus, a sign that by New Testament times, Edomites were still around under the Greek name, and that is in Mark 3 and 8. So, a summary: Edom is Hebrew, and that is the Old Testament, and it is in the southeast of Judah, Transjordan. Edomia is Greek or Roman, and it is during the intertestamental or New Testament period, south of Judah, part of Roman Judea. Okay, so the next thing I found interesting this week during this study was this portion right here from a commentary that says Judah has been unfaithful or treacherous, and a detestable thing has been done in Israel and in Jerusalem. Men were divorcing their wives for the economic advantage of intermarriage with non-Israelite women who worshiped idols. Through these marriages, Jewish men gained access to the merchant guilds and trading cartels already in place when the Israelites returned from Babylonia. Now, this really struck me because it really brought home like the mindset of the people who were returning. These people were were slaves in Babylon. They were coming back to rebuild their lives. So they had to rebuild business relationships. They had to rebuild friendships and try to merge into the community. So they were already in the mindset that we are behind the people who are already here, and we've got to start over and we've got to catch up. And so marrying into the culture, getting a head start in their minds sounded like a good idea, even though that was to the contrary of what they were required to do by the Lord. And being in the mindset that they were in, that, hey, the Lord has abandoned us, He has failed us, nothing is going the way these prophets said it was going to go. I've just come out of slavery or exile. I've just been free to go. I mean, they were still under the Persian rule, but I'm starting my life over. And here's this local woman that's going to give me an in to get my business going, to give me customers for the stuff that I'm going to produce. So that was appealing to them. I can really see how that was appealing. And it's really easy to do if we lose relationship with God, that it starts to make sense to us to kind of figure things out for ourselves instead of depending on Him. It's really, really super, super easy to understand. Doesn't make it right, but it's easy to understand. So, and the intertestamental period was the last thing that I wanted to touch on, and that was the Old Testament ends with the Jewish people reestablished in their land. During the 400 years from Malachi to Christ, the people of Israel lived under 6 different governments: the Persians, the Greeks, Egypt, Syria, and finally the Maccabees, and then Rome. So, of course, being under Roman rule is where we pick up the New Testament and Jesus' birth, and Herod being the Edomite, Herod, Herod being the Edomite, being in charge of things. And so that is exactly where we will pick up next time. And hopefully, this has been an encouragement to keep your commitment to make the word a real part of your life and your day, because we know that it's really easy to get off track. And I am committed to, as long as I believe the Lord, that I will give him the time that he deserves, at least make a really big attempt to do it, to give him the time that he deserves, to allow him to work in my life, because I just truly believe that the word of God and doing things God's way is our best chance of making this life work for us. So anyway, that is what I have for this week. God bless you and continue to smile upon you. And I'll talk to you next time, God willing.